to start the show. Um, Hi, everybody. This is Alex, and we're having technical difficulties. But according to some people, we can hear Tim, and he's the main presenter. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Tim, your show. Take it over, buddy.
All right, hey everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. Type some comments as we go. I have the chats going, so hopefully that I'm coming through to all of you. I see a couple who can hear me. So I'm up in Plattsburgh, New York, in the northern Adirondacks, and it's actually a heat wave here. It's 0 degrees Celsius, so it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit here, which is very warm. Just the other day, it was negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was still outside imaging with my scopes. So tonight we're going to be talking about cold weather imaging and some of the problems that I went through and I had to solve because usually when people hear cold weather and the snow and frost, people stay inside unless they have a remote observatory. So here's my tips tonight that we're going to go over. Um, is my screen the primary screen up there? Because I see Alex as the primary.
So you're on YouTube. It is showing as your screen.
Okay. So the objectives tonight, some of the stuff that I'm going to go over is cold weather safety. Safety is the number one thing and my number one concern. That's primarily from my full-time job. I'm a first responder, so up in the northern Adirondacks, we do have a lot of cold weather injuries and fatalities. So I always stress safety, safety, safety. We're also going to go over tips to image in the sub-zero temps. What gear should I use? Setting up in the cold and also imaging in the cold, and then breaking down at the end of the session. There's some special methods that I go about that I'm going to share during this presentation. And I'm also going to go over aftermarket options to help you image in the cold. Like I said, I live up in northern Adirondacks, just outside of Plattsburgh in Katyville, New York. I've been astro imaging from my backyard since April 2013. I'm also a member of the Adirondack Sky Center and Observatory. I image wide field, planetary, solar, lunar, and deep space. I love all types of imaging for astrophotography. One of the biggest questions I get is, what's the coldest you've ever imaged in? And my limit, just because I don't want to stress my gear out too much, is negative 28 degrees. Actually, negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But one time when I wasn't paying attention to the temperature, I looked out there and it was actually negative 28 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 33 degrees Celsius. And my camera that I used, I actually cooled to negative 20. However, even though it was colder than my tech cooler on my camera, it was still working and it was still putting out at 6% power. So people say, oh, it's cold, so you don't need to use a tech cooler. For DSLRs, that's a good thing when it's cold, but for the tech cooled cameras, I recommend still using your cooler when it's cold out. These are just some of the images I've taken from my backyard. I'm under Bortle 3 skies up here in Plattsburgh, New York. Can you guys hear me, or am I?
Tim, we could hear you there for a while. Somebody is right now listening to both YouTube and the Hangouts at the same time, so we're getting some feedback.
Okay.
So Terry or can't be Josh. Well, whatever the other feed is now stopped, so continue to.
Okay. So one of the big questions I have is how low will you go? Go ahead and put your comments in the live chat. I just want to see what people across the world are imaging at. Like I said, I regularly image in the sub-zero temps. You can see on here, I was actually sitting out in my car because it was so cold, and it was negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit when I was trying to look through my finder scope, and then center my go-tos and get going. Because I don't have a dome or an observatory in my backyard, so I'm setting up manually every night, every time I image. Um, so you can see some of the frost built in after a long night. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the ASI Air and the little Raspberry Pi devices that are out there, Stellar Mate and the Eagle as well, as options to image remotely so you can stay warm inside while your gear's outside. And so I spoke about the cold weather exposure, the dangers to it. It's serious. If you're out there in the cold, you trip and fall. Somebody's not paying attention. Somebody thinks you're out imaging, then they come out and find you with cold weather exposure injuries. And it could be fatal, could be life-threatening. So anytime you go outside, make sure somebody's checking on you. Make sure you have a buddy that knows that you're outside, and maybe setting an alarm for every 30 minutes just to check on you. Just make sure that they don't turn a porch light on or a backyard light on to go check on you, or else it's going to mess up your imaging. So the hypothermia, it's when your body loses heat faster than it can produce heat, and this causes a dangerous low body core temperature. So this is when your core temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and it happens pretty quickly if you're outside in extreme cold temps. You also have frostbite. Frostbite is a condition which the skin and the tissue freezes, and it mainly affects the exposed body parts, such as your fingers and your toes if your boots get wet, or your toes start to get cold if you're not wearing insulated socks or insulated boots. And the frostbite's broken down into 3 different degrees. The first degree is the least severe, which causes skin irritation. Second degree causes blisters. And then third degree is when all your layers are frozen and it causes permanent tissue damage. And then frost nip, I get frost nip when I'm out there and I'm not wearing covered up properly. It doesn't cause permanent damage, and it's best to warm up gradual. Don't go extremely from the extreme cold to the inside your house, because then you're going to feel the itching and burning sensations, and it can also cause the chilblains, where the skin sores that occur after an exposure to cold temperatures. And the big thing is heart attacks. You hear about people out in the cold shoveling their front walkway, but the cold thickens the blood, and it also can encourage blockages and lead to heart attacks. So these are just some of the safety issues to keep in mind when you're out there. Some of the things that I wear when I'm out cold weather imaging is I wear a Carhartt lined overall and my Carhartt jacket. I wear a face mask, winter gloves. I also have a surplus of hand warmers, body warmers, feet warmers, and I also have a battery powered socks that keep me warm as well. And then the thermal boots. And you can see, I just took a picture of some of my hand warmers and body warmers that I have. Every year around Christmas time, I get a large box of hand warmers as a gift from our local Tractor Supply store. And then while you're out there imaging, you can see my backyard after a nice thaw out, it'll freeze, and it turns into a nice tundra out there. So I use yak tracks on my shoes and my boots. Otherwise, I'm carrying my mount and my scope out there, and I don't want to trip and drop my scope or to hurt myself or break an arm. So these yak tracks definitely are worth it, and they keep me stable. The only thing, you don't want to wear them inside, or else they're going to scratch your nice hardwood floors up or cause some damage inside the house. So what causes frost and dew? A lot of people ask me, well, how do I tell if I need to crank my dew heater up? Dew forms on an object when the surface of the object cools due to a loss of infrared radiation, which is colder than the dew point of the air. So, for example, if your outside temperature is 45 degrees and you check and your dew point's 38 degrees, as the object cools below 38 degrees from that 45-degree air temperature, dew is going to start to form on the surface of your scope or of your objective. And as the temperature drops further, once it gets to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius, the moisture and the dew turns to frost, and that's where you start to get the ice and the frost buildups. dew point, we calculate that using the relative humidity of the air and the air temperature. As the relative humidity increases, the dew point also increases, and it will be closer to the air temperature. If the dew point and the air temperature are equal, fog will form, and the relative humidity will be 100%. So I'm going to go over the formulas. To get the dew point, you take 100 and you subtract it from the relative humidity and divide it by 5, and then you subtract that from the temperature in Celsius. So I have a little activity we'll go through here. So this is a scenario that I took off my weather station in my backyard. So you can see here it's 1 degrees Fahrenheit. The relative humidity is 88%. And it says here it feels like negative 6 degrees Fahrenheit. So what is the dew point or frost point here? So we're going to take that, the formula I just mentioned, the relative humidity, subtract that from 100, divide it by 5, and subtract it by the temperature. So to go over that really quickly, and the temperature has to be in Celsius for this formula to work. So you can see here 100 minus 88, which is the relative humidity percent, and then divided by 5, and then you subtract that from the negative 18.3 degrees Celsius, because I converted the negative 1 degree Fahrenheit over to Celsius, and that's going to give us negative 20.7 degrees Celsius. And that negative 20.7 is going to be the dew point or the frost point for this. And now you're going to convert that back to Fahrenheit. So then you take the negative 20.7 times it by the 1.8 plus 32, and you're going to get negative 5.26 degrees Fahrenheit. So that gives you in Fahrenheit for that. And you can look at charts and you can see the temperature, relative humidity, and the dew point just to figure out where you are as far as the humidity, the dew point, and you can kind of judge how you're going to set your dew heaters. However, I'm going to go over with my method of using an environmental sensor, and it works great. I don't have to crank up my manual dew heaters. I let the software figure it out. The other thing you can do, this is a weather channel. It's a dew point map, and you can see the temperatures, and it'll give you an idea. So if you're going out there, and it's I'm in upstate New York. Here's a Burlington weather station here showing 44 degrees Fahrenheit. So say it's 48 degrees Fahrenheit. You know the dew point is relatively close, so that's going to tell me, hey, there's a lot of moisture in the air. I better crank my dew heaters up on that. There's also a great app that I use, which is Astrospheric, and this shows the cloud cover, the transparency, the seeing, the wind, temperature, dew point, satellite imagery, radar, sunrise, and sunset. So this is an all-in-one app that I use on my phone. And I know back when I downloaded it, it was a free app. I'm not sure if they're starting to charge money for it or not. And then the dew heaters. You can see on my guide scope here, it's very clear. There's not one piece of ice or frost built up on it. And you can see my finder scope actually has quite a bit of ice on it. This is on my SCT scope. On my Newtonian, I have dew heater pads from Kendrick, and I also have one on my secondary mirror up front, and I'll show you how I ran that shortly. But it's very important where I am, and I'm not sure if it's important where some of you are, like in the Arizona desert, if you need to worry about dew or not, because I've never been down there, and I've never imaged down there. But where I am, if I don't have a dew heater running, I'm dewed up and frosted over in less than 30 minutes. So it happens quite quick where I am. And then dew heater controllers, you can use the basic manual AstroZap dual channel control, or you can use the Kendrick Astro Instruments, which basically has an environmental sensor, which I use, and also it has outputs to control and monitor the dew point and the temperature, and it tells the heater if it should crank it up or save some power by not providing a lot of heat for the dew heaters. And the dew straps, I always use the dew straps. Like I said, I'm frosted up very quickly, 30 minutes, So I always use dew heaters. I have a ton of different sizes that I use on my scopes, and I have a lot of different controllers that I use as well. My mounts, they take a beating, but they chug right along. And I actually find with my Celestron mounts, all my gear I use is basically the entry level gear, the stuff that you can buy. So uh, I'm not really a high end gear person. I like to get my images with the lower gear, what the average person can do and afford. But slowly I'm working my way up and getting some higher end gear. So I know this spring at Nice, I'm going to invest in a new mount. So that'll give me some extra some extra luxuries from my Celestron mounts. But I do find my Celestron mounts work great in the cold. It actually seems like it tightens it up a bit, and I get my best guiding on the cold sub-zero temp nights. So you can see the frost is never an issue here, but I'm very careful about bringing my gear in, and I'll show you towards the end of the presentation how I do that. This is the dew heater pads on my Newtonian, my 8-inch f3.9 Orion. I have the primary mirror. I have a pad on the back, and then I also made a secondary pad for the secondary. And you can see here that I ran a copper tape wire just up to the outside of the telescope wall. And I did this just so I wouldn't get have any issues with my diffraction spikes on my stars. So I get very nice clean diffraction spikes by having that copper tape wire going out there. And it also keeps my primary and my secondary dew and frost free. A lot of people, they say, oh, you can just put a fan on the back of your scope and that'll keep the air circulating and you won't get the dew. But I find that even with the fan going, I would get a lot of dew built up. And then they said, oh, you have a Newtonian, the dew isn't going to reach down to the primary mirror, which isn't true for my imaging because I found that my primary mirror would start to get dewed up and frosted over about halfway through my imaging run. So that's why I use the dew pads. And one tip I have too, if you decide to put a dew pad on the back of your primary, be careful how you tighten it because for a while when I put my dew heater or my dew pad on the back of the primary, I reassembled my scope and I took it out and actually I collimated it and then I took it out and I had the Mickey Mouse stars, which is the telltale sign of pinched optics. So I had to take a look at it and I had to loosen the mirror, basically the holders that tighten the mirror down because I had it just a little too tight. So I loosened it up a bit and it went back to normal after I collimated it again. And then dew shields. So with my SCT scope, I have a 9 1/4 Celestron Edge HD I use in my backyard. I also use a Hyperstar on it, and the dew shield works great. I still run a dew heater around it. You can see the blue band. I have a heater band, and I use the dew heater. It's the rigid one by Astrazap, just so when my Hyperstar's on it, I can cap it, and I don't have to worry about dust getting in. And also, it helps with stray light. So say my wife goes out, lets the dogs out, she turns the back porch light on. It's not as bad of an issue, but I'll still pause my imaging when I do it. But it also helps with the moon, the glare of outside lights and the moon glow. So that's another tip I have there. And then when you set up your scope, you want to set it up in a safe and stable environment. You want to make sure you're not set up on ice or you're not on a hill anywhere that your gear is going to start sliding away. You also want to set up away from heat vents because the fireplaces, dryer vents, sometimes my wife will be running the dryer vents at night, and if I'm imaging towards the house, I can get a little bit of turbulence. Even the roof line, that can cause unstable air with the extreme temperatures. And this is a little video. So this is a video after a night of imaging. I'm breaking down my scope and setup, and you can see how brittle the wires and cables are. I actually go through cables every year because if you don't let them come to temperature and you bend them too much, they're going to snap. It's nice to have some silicone cables. The silicone are more durable and they flex more instead of snapping or breaking. So, like I said, in the extreme cold, the wires and cables become stiff and brittle. You just want to use care at the end of your session. One thing that I do is I leave my setup outside and I let the sun, because the odds are if I'm imaging and it's clear out at night, it's going to be a nice sunny morning. So I let the sun kind of warm up and bring the cables to temperature, warm up a little bit before I start moving them inside. If I don't have that opportunity, I'll start moving. I'll unplug it. I'll try to keep the wire as in the original like position as it was while it was imaging, so I'm not bending it or balling it up or throwing it in a bag, so it lasts longer. And when you do replace your wires, you want to make sure you get a durable wire. Don't go on Amazon and buy the cheapest wire or cable that you can find, because I find those are the ones that, for me, they only last about a week, especially in the cold. But when I spend the extra $20 and I get that heavier duty wire or cable, that's the one that lasts. That it'll last me a couple seasons. And you always want to inspect the wires and look for little kinks or look for little separations or where it's breaking, because that'll be a telltale sign that you're about to go through a wire. And in the meantime, what I do is if it's starting to crack, I'll put a popsicle stick and I'll use electrical tape to kind of like splint it so it'll last a lot longer. So one of the nice things that I picked up is a Pegasus Astro Pocket Power Box. It provides 10 amps of power, has four 12-volt outputs, and it has two RCA outputs for your new heaters. It also has a 8-volt DSLR power output, and my favorite thing is this environmental sensor to monitor the humidity and temperature. I've heard a lot of people say that their environmental sensor goes, but I've been using the same environmental sensor all year, and I started using this power box. I picked it up at NEAT this past year, so it's been very reliable for me and hasn't had any issues. I also heard issues with the 12-volt outputs snapping off and people having to take apart the box and put them back together, but I haven't found this to be a case, and I'm pretty rough with my gear, and it hasn't snapped off or caused any issues for me. It's still running strong, and it's one of my favorite pieces of gear that I use out there. So a lot of people also ask me, well, my mount, I'm afraid it's going to seize up or it's going to get too cold for it. And you want to make sure that, see what kind of grease that the manufacturer uses. I know the higher end mounts use some better grease, such as shell grease or some of the super lube multi-purpose grease that has more extreme temperature range. But there's some options that you can do. There's some that you can do yourself, or there's some that you can send it away to get re-greased. So as the temperature drops, the grease will thicken. It's just like car oil. You get thicker grease, and it can cause stress on the motors or the gears. And it can also make the mount sound and act sluggish. You'll kind of hear it kind of whine when it gets colder. But if you hyper tune it, you can inspect, clean, polish, and replace the bearings and re-grease it. Deep Space Products, they're a great company that can do this for you if you send the mount into them, or you can purchase a kit from them and do it yourself. Or if you're handy and you like to tinker around, you can do it yourself. There's a lot of YouTube videos about doing it. You can use a citrus-based degreaser, and you can degrease your mount, and you can re-grease it with the more extreme durable grease, and it's very simple to do. You just have to be very careful and know what you're doing if you're going to do it yourself on that. And this is some of the mount grease that's out there that I would recommend. My favorite is the Super Lube multi-purpose synthetic grease. It's rated negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. There's also the Aeroshell number 33 grease, which is a good grease that's popular among the cold weather imagers, and that's rated negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you have the Lubriplate number 105. which is -60 up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's quite a few different options out there for you. One thing that I found with my mounts are the exposed ports. I went on Amazon and I bought a bag full of these plugs, and they're great because you don't want the moisture or the frost to get in and short circuit your mount. So if there's a port that I'm not using, I'll keep it plugged, and that way it keeps out the elements. And it's only a couple bucks for a box of 20 the ports. It's not expensive at all. Then with everybody using the laptops outside, the laptops, they run better in the cold, but then you also need to protect them from the moisture or frost and the condensation. So one way that I found to protect my laptop outside is to drape a beach towel gently around it, because the laptop would create heat, and it'll keep the heat inside the towel, and it acts as a natural heater. You just have to be careful you're not overheating your laptop or your computer, but this has proved reliable for me over the years. And then my favorite device that I've been using is the ASI Air. It's just based on a Raspberry Pi, very similar to the StellarMate and the other Raspberry Pi devices that are out there. This has organized my wires, my cables, and let me start getting away from being married to my mount and spending the night out with the mount. It allowed me to go inside. I could sit by the fire. I could sit inside during the winter, and now that it's getting dark earlier, I can actually have it imaging while I'm eating dinner and just have my iPad right there with me at the dinner table, imaging, plate solving, and spooling around. So this has been a great device for me. And the ASI Air, ZWO is releasing a Pro version of the ASI Air, which is going to have a 10 amp power supply built into the back of it. So this is going to be a pretty cool device. So the ASI Air also allows me to focus, change filter wheels, control the mount, plate solve. Gives me everything that I would be doing by the mount, but I'm doing it inside. So my wife loves it because I'm not outside all night. I can actually spend time inside and socialize. And some of the other considerations to heat, you have your hand controller. So if you're out by your mount all night, you're going to notice the hand controller is going to start to get sluggish, and you're going to also notice that the display will start to become difficult to read. So one thing that I use is I use my hand warmer, and I'll just use a rubber band and I'll put it behind the hand controller, and it gives it enough heat to keep it warm where I'm able to do things. And also you can see the Star Zona Micro Touch, my focuser. You can see that that's a little frosted over as well, and a little bit of a delay on that as well. And one thing you may find is that the focuser acts kind of sluggish. And you got to remember, there's grease in the focusers. So when you're trying to focus, you may notice that it's not as responsive. So my solution to that is I run a splitter off my dew heater RCA wire, and I run an extra dew band right to the focuser, and I wrap it around it. It gives it enough heat just to keep it warm, and there's no issues I have with focusing. I ran into this when I was trying to focus, and it was kind of clanky almost, like it wasn't smooth as it should have been. So then once I applied the dew heater band, it became very nice and a lot of freedom of movement on that. And the same thing, if you're out there doing visual or anything like that, you're gonna want to remember to cover your tail rad, or you want to put a dew heater band around your finder scope. That way you can still view or slew or go to a new target if you're not using the go-to capabilities and you're just star hopping around. And you can see down here, my mount, my Newtonian is all frosted over. You can see my secondary dew heater pad. I have the RCA port coming out. So So it's keeping my primary and my secondary mirror clear. And also you can see my guide scope. It's keeping my guide scope nice and clear as well. So I can image all night long with this setup. So I get a lot of people to say, well, what about cooling down? When I get out of work, I usually set up my stuff at 5 p.m. and I let the temperature stabilize. My 9.25-inch SCT doesn't stabilize until about 11 p.m. But I keep imaging all night. So I'll go out there at 5 p.m. I'll get an initial focus. I'll go back out every couple of hours and refocus. And this is where an autofocuser would be very handy, or if you're using SG Pro and you're able to focus as you go. But I don't, regardless of it changing, I still keep imaging because I don't want to waste any night's time. And when I'm processing my images, I'll go in through PixInsight and use Blink, and I'll look at the stars, and I'll throw out my images that aren't good. But a lot of times, if I'm going out there ever so often and keeping track on my focus, even though it's stabilizing, I'm still imaging pretty well. And this is the ASI air screen. You can see it has, I have a focus mask on the front of my Newtonian for this. And then telescope covers. My CGEM DX mount, it's a beast of a mount, and there's some times where I'm lazy. I don't feel like going out there and breaking it down or having to come back out and set it up. So I'll just throw a Telegizmo 365 cover over it, and I just leave it out there. I don't get the one with the dress that comes down to the bottom because I find that it traps moisture inside, whereas when it's open at the bottom, it's plenty of room for it to breathe. So I don't get a lot of moisture in there. I'm not running a humidifier or dehumidifier or anything like that under the cover. It's just the cover and that's it. So this is my backyard, and this is the typical environment that I'm imaging in. So now after a night of imaging, what do I do? How do I let it thaw out? As I said before, I let the morning sun kind of warm up the cables before I bring it in. But say I'm headed to work and it's cloudy, clouds are rolling in, there's going to be a rainstorm, I'm not going to be able to cover it up or bring it in. I'll just bring it in piece by piece without moving the cables as I can. Well, here's my AVX mount. I'll just move it in one trip without moving the cables so they don't snap, and I'll just put it on my tile floor in the bathroom and let it dry off. But when I do this method of having it inside, I don't power it on until I make sure and ensure that it's dry. Because if you got to remember, it's thawing out, so there's going to be a lot of moisture, and I don't want to take a chance with any of the electronics getting fried from the moisture. So I make sure that it dries out. But this one on the left, this is the best way that I find, and that's letting the sun dry it all out, because then you don't have to worry about the moisture or any moisture inside the plugs or short circuiting the mount. Okay, and so this year at NEAF, I'm going to be picking up a dome, so this will save me some time and really will help me set up and take down. So I have observatory coming in 2020. I'm very excited about this. And I've been looking at the different dome types, and I think I have one figured out that I'm going to go with. And here's my contact information. If you guys ever need anything, I'm very active on Facebook, and feel free to chat with me. I'm horrible with email, so if you're going to try to reach out to me, the best way to reach me is on Facebook, Facebook Messenger, or even on my website.
Okay. Does that conclude your presentation, Tim?
That is it.
Okay, you did a great job. Before we go any further, I want to say a couple things, and then we'll get back to it and asking any questions. Please, if you've got any questions, get them into the comment section right now, and because it's something we'll want to have to get into the comment section. Toga's not here. is a big part of running this operation. I think I've said several times at one point or another that we need volunteers. Tonight, Josh stepped in, and we did do some practicing, and we thought we had everything worked out, but we must not have had some switch set correctly or something. Who knows? It's, it's the internet, all that stuff. At any rate, thank you very much, Josh, for getting in there. What we finally got it to work, what we finally were able to produce a show with was we took a microphone and stuck it in a headset or something like that. And so you were hearing a direct feed, 18 times removed or something. So, but before we started, we had 37 people, and there's a little counter here we can check to see how many people are actually watching the show. It hit about 61, and that's like a typical audience for us. And what I really want to say thank you all for hanging in there, because maybe you're just used to us having technological glitches. We haven't for a while, but we are trying to get better at this. But remember, we need help. We need help. And if any of you out there know what we're doing and know how to do it, hey, just contact us, and we will try to help you out. We will try to get you in here to help us with this kind of operation. Josh just did tonight, and the next time Josh does it, I'm sure it'll work just fine from the get-go. Toga has been doing it, and when Toga started it, he messed up. I've done it a few times, and they took it away from me because I was like really messing up. But at any rate, we need your help. We need presenters. We've got a good set of lineup coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, Eric, have you been going through the questions and the comments over on YouTube, and is there something that we need to ask Tim about?
There's been lots of discussion. I think Tim's presentation has stimulated people to chat about how they handle some of these issues. There were a couple of questions earlier, but I think, Tim, you answered them. The one I
see one.
I mean, there was a question about tables, but I think you took care of that one. There were some people who comment that no matter what they do, their computer battery runs down, and what do you do about that?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I should have touched on that during the presentation. I run power from my barn to my mount. I have not found a battery that will last me an entire night. I've tried just about every battery out there. I've made my own battery power pack, but once you start getting in the extreme cold, it's not reliable. So I just run power right from my barn or from my house on that.
I don't see anything else right now.
I see a question about filters, which is a great question. I'm trying to find it again to see who asked that. I was just scrolling through the comments. So my recommendation to that is because I'm using the environmental sensor and I don't have issues with dew, but before I started using the environment sensor and if my dew heater wasn't turned up enough, my filters, they would frost up. So what I would do is I run the dew heater right around my reducer or my field flattener or even around the nose to the filter wheel, and that will keep it so it's kind of frost-free. Depending on your camera you use, ZWO has a camera dew heater. Basically, it's almost like a band, but it's a sticker that attaches to your camera, and that's a great way to keep the dew away as well. So that's something I would recommend as well if you're suffering from a frosted up camera or filter. You notice your filters are starting to get frozen up as well or frosted or anything like that. So that's what I would recommend there.
Alex, to you. Alex, are you with us? I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm back. I turned my mic off while Tim was talking. Thank you very much, Tim. It was a really informative show. I first saw an earlier version of it back at Neats a while back and really enjoyed it, and I wanted to get Tim here. We are always looking for presenters, but if you're watching my screen right now, you should see that coming up next week we time for celebration. No matter where you come from or what you're doing, the longest or shortest day of the year, depending on which hemisphere you're in. Um, all that other stuff. Cool. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, all the, Yule, for those of you who are Druids out there. Everybody just have a good time. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. And after the new year, Robert Reeves, one of the premier lunar imagers, will be back. Sam Ropert's going to be telling us about building an observatory. Bill Clugston will be here towards the end of the 19th, and he's going to be talking about those who have to image with some disabilities. I think he's had some friends who's, we're all getting along in age, and sometimes we can't do things quite as easily. And Bill's going to tell us some things that he's learned about doing that, and probably learn a whole lot about imaging as we go. And finally, the Gator Boy himself, Warren Keller, will be here. Warren has consented to tell us about what's new, particularly with the Fix Insight update. The big update come out lately, and he's been having some trouble with getting it to work just right. But he and some other people worked real hard on getting it. And so Warren's going to be here at the end of next month to tell us more about that. So we're always looking for other people to come on in and join with us. I don't have anything strange on my screen here. And I should probably stop sharing my screen so you don't get that infinite progression there. Anyway, thanks everybody for being here tonight.